Potential. Welcome to Level 6 of RPG Potential. I'm Cody, and in this episode, I'm talking with Ryan Alyea, the co-founder and game development studio director at Fangamer. They recently just released a new version of Off, available on Steam and Nintendo Switch. Thanks for talking with me, Ryan. What are some of your favorite RPGs and why?
Of course, my first favorite, I have a few actually here, but my first favorite, of course, will always be Earthbound. I came from the Starman.net community. That's where I grew up essentially. So that was a big major influence in my life.
I figured as much.
Yeah, and Earthbound itself is a great RPG. And so, that's where we all learned, kind of the value of community, the value of sticking together, the value of teamwork. And a lot of those themes are within Earthbound itself, right?
Yeah.
This is especially true because Earthbound is not a fantasy, it's not a sci-fi. It's a game that is based in the modern time, right?
Right.
So a lot of that is really influential, especially as a kid, when you're growing up, because you see yourself reflected in the various characters that are in Earthbound, because it is a lot of children playing.
Yeah, it's definitely, I feel like Ness is definitely like a self-insert type character.
Yeah, I think so. But, I don't really know like anything for certain about Earthbound other than I just like it, right?
Yeah. What are some of the others that you were talking about?
Yeah, so some of my others, Chrono Trigger, it's the first real RPG that I really sucked myself into, but it also, like, more than anything else, as I get older and I play a lot of these, is how it just has, like, the perfect pacing for an RPG, right? When you feel like you need a little bit of a breather, like, the game gives that to you, right? So you go through when you first learn magic or you first get the ability to time travel, like, so you first get to the end of time, and then you sort of like have this sort of like chill breather area where you kind of like the game unlocks for you until you get to the next like round of missions or dungeons or what have you that's in Chrono Trigger, because then you get stuck in certain time periods, so you have to figure that out before you get there. And then you go through and you get to the Magus battle, and then you go through and do that, and then you get a little bit more. I think there's a little bit more after that, and then you get to Zeal, where it's like there's intentionally no combat in that section, right? Or at least when you first get to Zeal. And it's really interesting because it's like you're going through and doing all this intense stuff, and then it's like, oh, nope, here's like the big magic castle, and you can just go and explore everything and see what's happening in that area, right? And it's wonderful that it gives you that sort of pacing in an RPG. You usually have a lot of like, oh, you're going to ramp up and do this. You're going to ramp up and do this. You're going to ramp up and do this. And you're going to raise the stakes. You're going to raise the stakes. You're going to raise the stakes. And that's really important in a story. But as a game, you need to give the player a breather.
Yeah. Can't be firing on all cylinders at all times.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, when it comes to something that's a bit more like in the modern era, I have been adamant about like getting people to play Jimmy and the Pulsating Mass, right? If you haven't played that or heard of it, just go look it up on Steam. It's a wonderful little, or no, I'll call it little. It's a wonderful RPG, kind of in the same vein as the Mother series. So if you liked Mother 3 in particular, you would really enjoy Jimmy and the Pulsating Mass. But the thing that gets me the most is how in that game, the combat, most RPG combat, you just have like your attack and your defend and like magic and like elementals and all that. The thing about Jimmy that I really liked was all the different configurations you had in combat. And then when you got to the bosses, especially like the secret bosses, where there's actually a lot of strategy involved in doing that, right? So the combat in Jimmy, I just love completely. So if you really love RPG combat, go check out Jimmy and the Pulsating Mass.
Yeah, that game is awesome. I totally agree with that sentiment.
So those are like my three like RPGs in particular. Lately I've been going through Clair Obscur Expedition 33, but I don't I haven't finished it yet, so I can't really like say much other than like, oh, this is nice and interesting and fun. But I don't have much to say right now about it because I'm waiting to get to the end of that.
All right. Those were a lot of great choices. Awesome. So let's go back to your past now. So, what were some of the first games you ever worked on or made yourself?
So I have been involved in all sorts of like random projects at Fangamer. Like I've made a bunch of really small things myself.
Right.
But sometimes like I always get involved in like interesting, weird things. So one of like my first games that went out to the public that was like a major release and not just like a little personal thing that I had made was the Sword or Whip ARG game. So it requires a little bit of explanation. So we were approached by Iga, one of the producers of Castlevania, who had just left Konami and making his own game.
Uh
Um,
huh.
and the game became Bloodstained. Um,
Oh,
right. So that game became Bloodstained, but we were promoting it and we were promoting this whole concept of like, um, the original creator, well, not creator, but the producer of the Castlevania series. And we're like, well, what if we did this like sword or whip thing? Because it was kind of like whether or not it was like the traditional Castlevania or like the whip, which represented like the Vania, exploration that the series has been more
yeah.
known for,
Right.
right? And so I ended up creating this little ARG called Sword or Whip. And so what it was that you went to a website and you just started clicking on sword or whip, right? And the idea was that it was actually like a vote towards which one it was. And as you interacted more with the website, it actually started to activate certain aspects of which. And then it started getting into like a huge vote and things started like popping up on the screen. It was kind of like an MMO incremental, if that could be explained in some way. Um, and so that had like a huge back end. I think there was like
Interesting.
at one point there was like 20,000 people playing at any concurrent users at any
Wow.
given moment. And it was just a free thing. You just go to the website and start clicking
Yeah.
buttons. And I had to deal with like, people were botting on that too. So I had to deal with like
Wow.
how to get people to do that. And so yeah, it was that. And the thing is that it was only meant to last for like a week or two, if I remember correctly, because I think the idea was, and I might be misremembering this, but the idea was like at the time of the full moon, something will happen, and that would be like the launch of the Kickstarter or something like that. And
Oh,
as you
yeah.
interacted with this, you got little hints, right? And so
Right.
as people started playing,
Yeah, I remember Fangamer helped in some way with the Kickstarter, right?
right, yeah. So
Yeah.
yes, so that was one of the things that I was involved in. So that was a really cool little thing. And I always end up doing like all sorts of random small bits and pieces for either Fangamers games or our partners games, where we do all sorts of random etc. stuff. Something else I had that came in mind was when we were discussing earlier, somebody had came up with this little like okay, so we were doing the Undertale 10th anniversary, and so a lot of people were talking about like, oh, remember this on Undertale, and then somebody mentioned this thing that I did, and I was like, oh yeah, that was a really fun thing. So the first combo pack for Undertale, Fangamer offers combo packs for our items, so you go in and you purchase different things. I think it has since progressed into, buy 2 plushes and get a discount, that sort of thing. But in the past, we offered just like set combo packs, right? And so you ordered like these 4 specific items, and then you got a discount. On the Undertale one, you got the little combo pack, and then Flowey would offer you an additional $1 discount. But if you got that discount, what it is that you got this like crossed out art card. But if you didn't take the discount, you got like a little nice art card, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And so that kept track of that, but also the entire mechanism in which that operated, because the number of items that were happening was a lot. And so the technical system involved in making sure that like did everybody get the right piece and all the right parts, and making sure that the operations in the mailroom did all of that sort of stuff. So that was a lot more like of the physical operations that we've been doing. So those are like the sort of like games, that sort of thing. Like off is like my first like major traditional game, if you will, right? But I've been working on doing all sorts of random back end pieces and just web stuff like of that sort of nature that is really like, you know, something that's either in promotion or something that is like supportive and doing really weird things like that. Because it's not like, you can go to Amazon and just be like, oh, you get $1 discount and then you get something weird in the mail. Like,
Yeah, there has to be some infrastructure to that too when you implement something like that. That's really cool though. I know one thing that definitely was a big help that I really appreciated was the Earthbound battle background generator.
yeah. So there was I didn't work on that entirely, but I fixed and found the issues with that. So that was something when I don't know, that was like 10 years ago. So that was like not that long ago. Starman.net and everything was in like 1999. So this was like 2015. So that wasn't that long ago.
That was really helpful. I used that a lot for other videos on Mother Forever.
Yeah, so I remember that, but I remember that somebody had did some of the work, but nobody had figured out like the rest of the details as to how the battle background worked. And so I was like, well, okay, I'm going to actually figure out the rest of it, right? So it was like where all this data is, and so for anybody who's not familiar, the way that the Earthbound backgrounds work is by basically using every single option that's available to you. So it uses palette swapping, it uses XY coordinates, and uses it layers on top of each other. So there actually is layering allowed on the Super Nintendo, but it's in a very specific way. I'm not sure if it used windowing. I think it did. It had to have during at least the final battle, but yeah, it was basically all that. And so I remember seeing I remember now, and that was because I wanted to re-implement it entirely in a shader. And I saw that somebody had made something that used like the original images, but it wasn't like entirely 100% accurate. So I went and found the rest of the pieces to make it accurate. I think other people have since moved on and taken it and like made it even more accurate, but I did like a lot of like, oh, why is this inaccurate? And why is all this data still like, what does this number mean?
Right.
And so I went and looked it up.
That's super interesting. So going back into some of your Earthbound projects, I guess, what were some of your favorite projects that you worked on back on Starmen.net?
I love the Earthbound Battler, so that was the thing that I was probably most known for. So there were different like ROM hacks in Earthbound that could be done. And so most people made like their own little like sections and areas that you can go into. I took the entire engine, and I guess these days you would call it like a roguelike sort of battler, right? Back then, I don't think there was even that sort of terminology. So that's just like, oh, you just kind of go in and you do your battles, and then you do, I can't remember, I think you do like 5, and then you talk to Tracy, and then like you got like either an upgrade or a weapon or like a chance to like save or heal or something like that. I definitely remember a few things like that was put in there. So you had like a little fun sort of roguelike experience of going through the Earthbound battles.
Yeah. I would totally classify that as its own game also, for sure. I mean, even though you worked off of stuff to make it like a fan experience, that was an awesome piece of work. I love that thing.
And if I remember correctly, I did not do any special like hacks, or very little of them. Everything in that was implemented entirely within the Earthbound scripting system. So
Wow.
there was no reason why you couldn't just use Earthbound's existing scripting system to implement that, which kind of tells you like why we all loved hacking on this SNES game, was because, oh yeah, the script actually kind of was super easy to do.
Yeah.
It was still oddly specific. Now I haven't interacted with it in like 10 or 15 years, so I have no idea what it's like right now, but yeah, well, there was a lot of fun in just like taking this Super Nintendo game and just being like, okay, here's the modifications to it and then getting it to work and do like weird things like that. And then some people inserted their own music, and some people inserted their own like artwork and a whole bunch of other stuff. And even then, like I said, even 10 years ago, 2015, we were still finding out how like some of the those background animations work and some of the other small things.
Yeah.
So I'm sure there's still more things to explore within the Earthbound ROM itself. And that's just one single Super Nintendo game, let alone any other potential
Right.
games that are out there. Like, you know, and there are some that are more dug into than the others because I'm thinking of like, Mario
Definitely.
World Kaizos and that sort of thing. But then you start looking
Yeah.
into like, some of the other games, so who knows what you'll find that's actually still in there to this day and nobody has even bothered to look.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah. Were there any other projects that you could think of that you really liked to work on back on Starman?
So there was that, but another one was basically just the forum as it exists today. That was my first major like web project. So what that was
Oh,
basically I had built the entire forum essentially from scratch. And it
wow.
was used to this day. It's still only used on Starman.net for what it is worth. I still go in and do little updates every once in a while, but
Yeah.
nothing too terribly major. Most of the stuff that I do is just to go into the code and be like, okay, this AI bot is now banned. This AI bot is now banned.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's
I
to the
saw the
point.
problems with the AI bots recently. That sucks.
Yeah, so recently now you have to log in to view the forum, and that's because the AI bots are just getting so bad that like I couldn't. It was a war that I couldn't
Yeah,
have time for, and it's like, well,
exactly.
I have to go in and just be like, no, you have to be able to do so. On the positive side, like the forums now, like it used to take like 2 or 3 seconds per page to load. Now it's near instant. So there's an advantage to blocking the bots, but unfortunately, it comes at a certain cost. That's not to say that you can't build a website infrastructure that can withstand that. It's just that it's no longer my focus right now.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't realize you made the forums from scratch though. That's so cool.
Yeah, so it was made from scratch, and it wasn't just used in Starman.net. It was used for a couple of other things. Probably the biggest one
Yeah,
was used
I heard
for
that. Yeah.
Guild Wars 2. So it was used as a Guild Wars 2 forum, and I had implemented their point system. So they had like most forums and communities, you have like these point systems. So it had like a point system and it had like an expiration and all this other stuff. But the biggest thing that I liked was, at least at the time, was that when the game went down, the forum still stayed up. So when everybody went to the forum to talk and say, "Hey, the game's down," the forum is still up and available. That one still had a lot of custom work to that, but most of it was related to the caching and that sort of thing, and getting things to function within that forum. And then just in general, the website in general. So a lot of the website programming was done by a team of people, and I was involved in that too. So the main website where we had to go and submit all the items, and you can show off your artwork. It was still very like the. Again, I mentioned this as like, oh, you can submit artwork and have everything onto, and it makes a little, and there's a little thumbnail generator that the staffer can use to like give themselves a little thumbnail. And you're used to that right now. You log in and upload an avatar to Twitter, and it gives you a chance to change, do the little cropping or whatever. This was before Facebook. This was around right around the same time as MySpace was getting very popular, and we were
Oh
building
boy.
those sort of technologies within the website. But we were using it specifically for an Earthbound fan site, and that's all we really ever wanted to make. We had no real intention of like making this website that eats other websites. We just wanted to be,
Yeah.
we just wanted to make stuff for our own community that much more better.
Yeah.
But I don't think that like I think in order to make one of those big giant websites, you needed something more than just four bored teenagers in their mom's
Yeah.
basement, like
Right.
because that's what all of that stuff was like made out of, was just us teenagers just doing things for fun. And we're like, oh, we're just gonna build this website, we're gonna make a forum and just have other people do stuff and help out. Or the Summer main site, where it's like you can upload this and you can do a poll, and whenever the radio was on, it would promote the radio, right? um you know Adding those little small touches really like was very influential to our community. Um, and so it's really interesting to see how community development has changed on the internet. When I don't want to say I was at the very beginning, because then that's when you're talking about like BBS services, which I participated in. I remember definitely having to log in, and when you say you log into a BBS, it was dial up, right? You had to dial into a different system, right?
That was before my time.
Yeah, so in order to go and be part of like an online community, you had to like dial into someone's modem,
Yeah.
and then they had like
I've heard the tales.
a little forum or a little type of thing that you logged into, right? This was before AOL or any of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right? So it was just a little text thing you logged into. I had experienced that like as a kid. And so just how community has changed over the years, because you had little dial-ups that you got into, and you had websites that kind of did some things, and then now everything's in Discords and private forums, and I don't even know what is even out there these days, right? Twitter.
It's really changed a lot. I have the experience of co-founding that Mother Forever site.
Right.
And it was much different when we started that site, because everybody was, and still is now that we've wound down everything, just kind of distributed in their own places, like their own Discords and their own spaces on social media. It's way more separate, I guess.
It's a different time. When you have all these communities that are sort of apart from each other, and then also their communities within other communities, because you have the Earthbound community that's on Twitter, the Earthbound community that's on Reddit. I'm sure there's probably 5 or 6 Discords that I don't even know of.
There's so many,
and just trying to gather everyone and everything is it certainly trying to find like your community is always like, I'm not sure how people do it these days, right? I'm an old guy. I have my own, I'm set in my own ways, man. So I don't know. Then again, I see, everyone under the age of like 14, they're only playing like Roblox. So maybe it's a thing.
It's weirder nowadays. Moving on from Starmen now to Fangamer. How did you help found Fangamer after Starmen.net? I'm assuming you had a large hand in the website side of things.
Yeah, so Fangamer started when basically just Reed sent me an email that said, hey, let's take Starmen.net and kind of see if we can take that formula to other communities. And that manifested into the T-Rex post. If you don't know what I'm talking about, just probably Google Starman.net T-Rex post. We'll probably find that somewhere. And it turns out that in the middle of the great financial recession that happened like 2008, websites that were ad revenue supported kind of didn't make any money. So that was kind of the original idea. So with Fangamer, Reed was like, well, okay, we're going to make some t-shirts and put them up for sale. And that's kind of like one of those famous last words where it's like, well, okay, that kind of went off on its own there. Because I had built the forum as part of like, Fangamer's big giant, like, okay, so we're going to do something that's basically like those fandom wikis. I think those are the ones that are like around everywhere. We were kind of planning on doing something like that, but less gross.
Right.
So that was kind of something that we were interested in doing. But that never really worked out for a bunch of different reasons. And so we're like, well, let's just sell t-shirts. And then we did. And then we just kind of didn't really stop. And we just kept doing different things. One of the other projects you were talking about, like what games have you worked on and made yourself? One of Fangamer's first licensed products was a really interesting one where we were working with a documentary that was going around, and one of the things they had was, well, what can we do to pay ourselves for this documentary? It's like, well, you can kind of have this merch license for this game, and we're like, okay, it'll be kind of like the first merchandise that's available for this, and we're like, okay, that's kind of neat. The name of the game was called Minecraft. I don't know if you ever heard of
it. Wow. I did not know. I did not remember that.
That was only part of the Kickstarter, so it was only part of their Kickstarter, but we made like we made a creeper wind-up, right?
Wow.
So that was something that we had actually made. So we had made, if not the first, like, I'm sure there were probably like little fan bits, but it was kind of the first sanctioned one. I don't want to call it official because it was kind of like you were allowed to use it, but you couldn't really use it. It was like in really
Yeah.
strange circumstances. But at the same time, it was like, oh yeah, you can totally do it, and still had to get like approval and stuff like that. And this was back when Minecraft was still an alpha, right? So
Wow.
that was one of the first things that we did there. And then we kind of moved on and did a whole bunch of other merchandise. And, if you look back at Fangamer's history a long time ago, a lot of our items were unofficial, right? So we had items.
Oh yeah, I bought a lot of those unofficial things back then when I was a kid. Yeah.
Inspired by Earthbound, which is, of course, where we started, yeah. Inspired by Chrono Trigger. Inspired by Metal Gear, which we now have an official license for now.
Yeah.
Which is really wild. So that was kind of like, as we kind of kept, at a certain point, we definitely had to, look inside the company and be like, look, we have to go official, right? There's only
Yeah.
so much you can do until you can get into trouble, right? And so, we kind of stopped doing the unofficial stuff and worked more on
Right.
the official items. And it kind of helped that we had like that sort of customer base to be able to do so. We had a lot of people that were really excited to see some of the indie games that were really popular at the time. So we were able to help support those developers as well. So that was really helpful. And we did a lot of Kickstarters. So we were involved in, what Kickstarters were we involved in? Like we were involved in the Double Fine Adventure. We were involved in Psychonauts 2. We were involved in Bloodstain. We were involved in Shenmue 3. We were involved in Mighty Number 9.
Yep.
So all those Kickstarters we were involved in were ones that we had all did all the physical merchandise for, and there's a lot of back end that needs to be done on that because you got to collect shirt sizes, you got to collect colors, and
Yes.
backer credits and addresses and addresses and addresses, because of course every single time you do something you want to make sure everybody's all in the same spot. So there's a lot of really details involved in that sort of thing.
I didn't realize Fangamer started off early on doing a lot of those Kickstarters.
Yeah, so that's kind of so we just kind of started doing that because we did the 2-player one
Yeah.
for Minecraft, and we were like, oh, let's do another one, and then we did the Double Fine one, and we just
Right.
kept moving on and on until, of course, I think Shenmue and Bloodstain are still the #1 and #2 game on Kickstarter, if I remember correctly. I haven't checked in years. They're not the top of gaming because I think there's some hardware that's in the top of gaming, but in terms of games themselves, they're like the #1 and #2 actual game and not like a piece of hardware.
That's awesome that you were able to be involved with that. Yeah, and I know you're still doing it now with I know recently the Anton Blast, you were working with them for that. I think, right?
So Anton Blast, we're still doing some stuff for that. Mina the Hollower, we're still doing that, but that's on a much more relaxed schedule, I will say, compared to those other Kickstarters, because on our side it's okay, well, we'll get all the pieces and then it'll ship once we get all the pieces in. When we get the pieces in, that's all based off of the partner and when things are approved,
Right.
and a whole bunch of other stuff. It's, there's a big giant dance that needs to be done here because you need to coordinate all these different pieces and parts.
Yes. Yeah.
So when things are ready, then they'll go out to people. And that's still some of the software that I made to put together Bloodstain, because that was just so many different people.
Oh,
It
wow.
needed
Yeah.
a significant portion just to manage that. And so some of the
Yeah.
other Kickstarters are doing that. These days we don't do as many Kickstarters because that requires a bunch of manpower and collaboration and that sort of thing. So
Right.
some people come to us and go, we want to have a Kickstarter, would you like to help us? And I'm like, that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So we've been kind of discouraging people from coming to us on Kickstarters just because of the amount of effort that's involved. It's never a no.
That makes sense.
But it is not a core focus of the company at this time.
Right. Okay. That was great to hear about the the beginnings of Fangamer. Let's move on now to Off.
Yes.
What are your favorite moments in Off, and how did it feel to recreate those in the new version of the game?
One of my favorite moments certainly was the final battle. So you had that choice between whether or not you can do as the judge or not.
Yes.
And it's really fun to re-implement those, especially when you're doing, I don't want to use the word remake because even though we remade the entire engine from scratch, we're still using a lot of the original elements. But there were some things that still
Yes.
had to be redone or touched up. So, for
Right.
example, we have the new battle UI. And so you have just the batter's face and all the I think we put alpha and omega and epsilon, and and they have little icons and stuff like that. But then you go into the judges battle, it's like, oh, we need an icon for the judge. Right? We're like,
Yeah.
oh crap. Like, as we're getting towards the end of development, we're like, oh, we need an icon here for the judge. As we started implementing this and just going through and doing all those bits and pieces, especially when on an RPG Maker side, it's just like, oh, we're going to implement these spells and that's it. But on our side,
Right.
we changed everything. Everything was rebalanced. So we go in, put in the old information. It was like, oh, that doesn't make sense. So we're putting that in. At the same time, we start doing really fun things too. So one thing that I hope the community has caught on is that for that final battle, when you're going against the batter boss, it turns out that I don't know if anybody caught on to this, but all the values of the batter is actually the values of the actual batter themselves. So the defense, the attack value,
Oh, wow.
and all the items that the batter was wearing. So some people had at least people had realized that, for example, you can't. They're like, oh, I can't use like poison or something on that boss, and the answer is that's not necessarily true. That's because you were wearing the item that prevents poison. And so when it goes on to that,
I didn't notice that. That's awesome.
and so the only thing that's hard coded in there is the HP value, because we wanted to be like kind of a big giant epic battle, right? But everything else was based off of what the batter had at the time. So that's why some people had like a really hard time and some people had a really easy time. It was kind of like, yeah, there was actually something I had on my list towards the end of development, was to go and balance, but never found the time to do so. But it was still but it makes it kind of funny because it's, you're battling the batter, right? So you actually have the actual batter's stats values, except for HP. So HP was the same. We had to boost that up to make it a little more exciting.
That's really cool. I didn't notice that. I wanted to say this at some point. I played off for the first time with this version of the game. I never actually played the game before. I have to go back and play the original game now. I knew a lot about how it went, and the ending I knew about too, but I had no idea that was changed for the ending.
That wasn't really a change. That was just me goofing around and being like, this is really funny, right? And so with the combat, we can do all that sort of stuff.
Right.
But two things, which is that one thing that was interesting is I saw a lot of people, as they played off, we had basically 3 groups of equal size. And so we had someone who had played off, really loved the game, right? We had someone who had heard of off, but never really found the chance to play it. Maybe they were part of the community when it was popular on Tumblr, or just like in general were like aware of it, but never played the actual game itself. And then we had another third of people that were like, oh, well, I never heard of this at all. What is this? Right. And so it was kind of interesting to see, like, who are we making this game for? And with all the people, it was like in equal groups of like the 3 wildest like types, right? And so that's why like it was really interesting to see like some people are like hardcore RPG gamers and being into that and wanting to see like a much more juicier content. Well, at the same time, how do you do that while respecting the history of, the combat in off? The original one was not, the off was many things, but its original combat was not quite like up there, I would say. And so, the bosses were big, like bullet sponges, essentially. And so we wanted to make it more exciting for players while still having all of the original spells that did competences and what they actually did, right? And so when you're doing that, we put in everything, but then go, okay, we have to rebalance everything without ever actually changing any of the actual effects. I think the only things we really changed was like, I think a couple times, like what status effects that were actually healed were changed, just because it just was at one point, I think we were going through the ball and got too much confusion. It was like, you need to have like an anti-confusion at this point. So I think we put 2 in. I think we made the anti-confusion on Omega a little easier, and then we put in an item somewhere in the mall somewhere. So there were a few things that we didn't. I don't want to say like it's a pure like, oh, this is the original game and that's it. Like obviously the combat has changed, so we put in a few extra like little bits that were much more helpful. But we tried in general to make as little changes as possible. That said, there were still some. Even today, there's one that's like in our bug list. It's like technically this is emulation accurate, but it's still a bug. Do we fix it or not? And we're getting closer to like, well, some things are just pure errors, so we're just going to update that, even though it's technically visually pixel perfect, right? It's still like, well, we want to make this like, if this is for the audience that's playing off for the first time, I want you to feel like this is a complete game, that this is something that's worthwhile, worth putting out there, worth preserving, that makes it so that everyone can actually like be able to go, okay, this is it. And there are versions of the game out there that are the original versions and that are just as perfectly well to be preserved as well. They should be. I'm not discouraging other people from going out and playing the freeware version of the game.
Absolutely.
Like, please go out and do so. We're just providing something that's a lot easier for people to be able to do so, and it's a different take.
It's more accessible.
It is accessible, especially on the combat side, where it's like,
yeah.
Again, one of the complaints that I saw, which was really funny, which was just like, this feels like it comes from 2008, and I was like, well, we put in a lot of work into the combat system, but at the same time, like, hey, if it still feels like 2008 from you, but it doesn't feel bad, then that's great. We did our job, because I want people to play this game, feel like it comes from 2008 while still actually being respectful of players' time, being respectful of players' like preferences, and all the modern amenities that you're used to, and you don't realize unless you're playing both versions side by side and you see like, oh, there's actually a significant amount of change that was involved just to get this to be, a much more accessible version of the game.
That kind of goes into the next question I was going to ask. So Mortis Ghost, I'm sure, had the final say on anything new that was added to the game. But did you or any of your other team members influence anything else, like the critical hit system and some of the other things you mentioned?
So the critical hit system definitely was something that we implemented. So we were basically told, put something that's kind of like the original, but, kind of update it, right? The critical hit system came about because like, well, okay, we need to have like, every modern RPG always has like its one gimmick, right? Something that you want to like, this is the thing that we're basing our entire system around off of. And we're like, well, what's the one gimmick that we can make without changing any of the other base rules? Because we have an ATB system that's very similar to a RPG Maker 2K game, 2K3 game.
Yeah.
What else can we do here? And then we're just like, what if we could like telegraph criticals in advance? And then we're like, well, okay, but what about items? What about defense? What about this? And we're like, well, no, all of it becomes boosted in some way. And so we're like, hey, and we were just discussing in like a design meeting, and we're like, okay. The next day I went and implemented it, and I was like, oh, this is fun. This actually like...
Yeah, I thought that was really fun.
Because not just you, the enemies also had that as well. And so that was like, the enemies also getting that as well. I need to do something about this or prevent something from happening. And then later on with the, as we later added the new bosses actually use the critical hit system against you as well, right? So I don't know if you noticed, but like, as I watched many other players play, is that the critical hits actually telegraph different things in the combat. So like, for example, in the fish battle, the critical hit system is really important because it telegraphs something to the player that if something is critting, maybe something is up here, right? Maybe something that isn't good is happening, right? So maybe, look into that. Hopefully some people have figured that out. And then they all do different like effects. So just pay attention to something, because that became like one of our like kind of tells to people, because sometimes it's not random, right? You really need to pay attention to that.
Was there anything else that you or your team influenced in this version of the game?
Well, so we try to keep it as close to the original as possible.
Right.
But one of the other things was, again, when we put in the new bosses, it kind of allowed us to have much more easier access to the artificial intelligence that's running the enemies. And so when we put that in there, we're like, oh, okay, we put in the new bosses and these things are like really cool. And then we're like, well, what if we wanted to update the existing bosses? Because they just did what their original effects were. And so we're like, well, okay, we actually did a round where we updated the original bosses as well, right? And we try to keep things within like the same concept, but then they become, I don't want to say like they're not as hard as like the new bosses, but the old ones did have updated effects. So Diden would do his super moves on the 12th of any person's 12th move, right? We put that out,
Oh.
and so we put that out in the demo, and people were a little confused as to like when he's doing his attack. So that's why we added on that little clock animation. That clock animation tells you when
Yeah.
D-Dan's going to do his move, right? And so that's helpful to other players, and we kind of added other effects to that too. So for example, Enoch would actually have a different animation based off of if he's tired or not, right? So if he's tired, he kind of has this slow animation and it doesn't do as much hits. But if he's serious, then he's a little bit faster and hits really, really hard, right? And it kind of like that also implies to the player like, hey, these are when you should be doing like more defensive, or at least be aware that he might insta kill if you're like not in the right level. So
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
So out of all the new things that were added off, what was your favorite thing that was added to this new version of the game?
Oh, I love the critical hit system. Like I put it in
Yeah.
the next day and I was like, oh, this is so much fun. It adds so much like tactical ability to it. And we had a lot of fun figuring out like the different like things that it, like what happens for that wide angle. We had an issue with it because you want to be able to see the different effects. But then I was like, well, what if we just hid like HP values behind a crit wide angle? And so that shows the effect there. And just putting it in and figuring out the special effects of that. And there are all sorts of like random hard codes that are related to the critical hit system. So for example, when you have the Joker item gives you a revive and it revives you at 25%, but when you use a critical, it revives you at 100%, right? And so there's a whole bunch of really small things that were changed to adjust to that critical hit system. On top of that, we always add a lot of really small things. I liked when we added the little dust or the little like water pattern, the water drop when you're walking around. We added little small animation and it's like ladder animations because once you have full control over everything, we can do little small things. The thing is that with the overworld, it still runs on an emulation layer, so there's only so much we can actually change. But when we're putting things in, it's like, oh, okay, well, we can detect we're on a ladder, so you can show the ladder animation and stuff like that. So there are really fun, really cool little things that we can go in and do. One thing that's interesting is that there is a patch system for the game, so we actually still re-import the original game and kind of patch it on top. So when we implement things, because this was when we were working on the emulator, so it's like, oh, this effect's not implemented yet, right? But we still wanted to slowly go through and patch the game, so the game has this like patching system involved that kind of patches like the different actors on the screen. So when it goes through, so I just did one today where I think a door went through like to a wrong area or something like that, just very minor. And it's like, oh, okay, I have to go back to the patch system and add this as a patch, right? So little small things like that we're still going through and doing, but we fixed all the really like major pieces. I think one of my bugs that I have on my list is like Epsilon does not come at a full heal or something like that. So I had to figure out like because that's going to be patched into the game script. So I got to figure out re-implement that in the patched RPG Maker imported code. It's like it's not even like the original code, it's like an imported version of it and then patch that. So
interesting. So it's like a kind of multi-layered thing.
So adding a patch is like you can do, I mean, it's really small things you can do, but then you're like once you get to these crazy RPG Maker scripts and it's like, oh, I have to make a change to that. That's why like some are completely unchanged from the original, for better or worse. The Chimney Fall minigame is running entirely on the emulator and is unchanged because none of us wanted to actually patch it. So for better or worse, it is the same as it was in 2008. But at the same time, it's also running pixel perfect, right? There's no need to change it other than, you have to be a little perfect on it. But I play through that multiple times a day sometimes and just like, okay, I figured out all the tricks. By the way, the trick for the Chimney Fall minigame is that you want to stay in the center and then get to the little circles. So always go back to center once you're done moving.
Yeah, that makes sense. Was there anything particularly interesting that was unused for this version of the game that Mortis Ghost or the team didn't end up including? Or was there anything that went unused in the original game that was added into this version?
No, I don't think there was a lot of like we were very efficient with our development, so
Mm-hmm.
there's not a lot of unused content. As far as the original
Okay.
game goes, we never really got much of anything. It was just here's the original game, and here's a
Yeah.
few extra bits and pieces, but it was all like stuff that was already visible. So there was nothing that was like think
Right.
unused. And then we were, like I said, we were very efficient in like what we were doing. Now we did add things, and I think there were some like small icons that were unused or something like that. But like all in all, like I can't think of any unused content just off the top of my head.
So how did you decide on using Unity to remake Off? I guess it had to do with its compatibility with that version of RPG Maker or
No.
the layer of it? No?
So our original concept was, well, if we use Unity, we can easily hire people to do something for it. Famous last words, because the answer to the question was much more harder than we thought it would be.
Oh boy.
Especially because we were implementing an emulator. Well, not an emulator. I say emulator. It's not really a good word. A reinterpretation of the original game script in Unity
Yeah.
that also used that took the original tile maps and then put that into Unity's tile maps,
Oh, okay.
and then implement Unity's tile map system. I mean, as a positive side, it's like, well, once you use that, you can still have access to things. Like, for example, tile maps can let you have scripts associated with every title. So you can do different change or animation effects if you need to do so. So it's very easy to import. I say that because I actually just re-implemented not that long ago, changing the tiles for different languages. So of course it says library above the library, but now it says biblioteca for Spanish.
Yeah.
So it's still useful in that regard. That's one of the things. But yeah, it was mostly so that we thought they would be easy to hire, and it turns out not really. On the positive side, I will say that like it has made things a lot easier because our original target was Switch only. We were never going to do a Steam release.
Uh-huh. Oh, wow.
So after a while, a lot of people convinced us, hey, we should probably do a Steam release. So of course, by the time it was announced, we were already planning on that. But we were originally
Yeah.
going for Switch only because the original concept for the Off project was, well, what if we put it onto a Switch game card?
Right.
That was the original concept of us making doing the remake, the remaster of the game.
So did you work with do you usually work with platform holders when it comes to Fangamer putting things on cartridges? Or is it usually somebody else on the team who does that kind of thing?
Nowadays, there's a whole bunch of people. There's like 3 or 4 people that are involved in that. Nowadays, I'm more focused on the game development side, but I used to do that. That was my team that I headed up before I moved to off in game development.
Oh, okay, cool. So, yeah, so the reason I asked that is because Fangamer's published a lot of physical versions
Yes.
for games. So how was this process of publishing and developing a game all in Fangamer, and what were the deadlines like for this? And you just mentioned that Switch was the original target, but was there a reason why you didn't decide to also put it on PlayStation?
We knew going into it that we wanted to ease the burden of porting because we were doing the porting in-house entirely.
Yeah.
We didn't do like
Right.
a porting house. We did it entirely ourselves. The original concept was Switch only because we wanted to make things as easy as possible, and we wanted to go for the audience that was most likely to purchase the game, right? And it would be on Switch because it's great to play portable, and there's no reason it runs 60 FPS solid. I did a bunch of work to make sure that even like the load screens were as quick as possible. So there's Switch was a great platform to work with, and just seems like it's perfect. So that's why we just wanted to reduce our development resources, because when you add platforms, you're adding a bunch of different complexity. Adding Windows
I
alone,
understand.
like a proper Steam release. Takes time and effort. Like even in off right now, there's technically no window mode. You just have to make sure you know that like Alt-Enter is that old key command from back in however many years ago. Will get you off of full screen. We don't have the menu option for that yet, right? That's one of the things I need to add in the next patch. There's no menu option for windowed mode. So those are the type of things that's like, then that's because we decided on doing Steam pretty late into development. Because we were originally just going to do Switch only, and then we'll think about the other platforms later. And it became clear that when we discussed this internally, that more people were more interested in Steam than they were on Switch, even though that was our primary platform at the time.
I know how that goes. I also, with my studio, we self-published a game at the beginning of this year, and having to work with the platform holders was a lot, especially for all of the different platforms. So I understand entirely what you mean by
we did Steam and Switch day and date, same day.
Yeah,
too,
that's difficult. Right? That's super difficult.
So, and then having to add more platforms would have been just more work on our side.
Piling more on the top. That makes a lot of sense.
Right. And it's not impossible. It's just preparatory. And at a certain point, it's like, okay, the game's done. I'm just working on the, adding the PlayStation icons, or I'm adding, all the really small stuff. There's a a lot of really small things that you have to do on each platform.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean, because our game was released at the end of last year, and it just was months of me trying to get it to work on the other platforms, so it was not easy. I understand totally what you mean.
Yeah, it's a decent amount of work, but it's not it depends on what it is and what you're doing. It's not impossible. Especially
makes sense for your first release in-house.
Yeah, especially that. Especially if it's a pixel game like this one, you don't have to worry that much about console complexity. And we are already 60 FPS locked, very fast loading on Switch. So it runs great. The only small issue that I ran into was that on Steam, we had to update our version of Unity pretty late into the process. So we have a pretty modern version of Unity, which makes it really hard to play on Windows 10 and earlier. It's still possible, but it's really hard because it's just the latest version of Unity. But it does have very low system requirements, so long as you can boot Windows 11. So I guess there's that.
Yeah. Were there any particularly difficult deadlines to get the game finished in time for processing stuff for the physical release, or did you not really even worry about the physical stuff until the game was done?
With the physical release, we are still working on all the bug patches and getting the localizations done before we really want to put it onto a game card.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So before we really put it out onto, we want to make sure that even the first ones that are out there are still really good. So we're still working on getting that done. I've done a good number of localizations. I posted that on Off's Twitter and Blue Sky, so you can go see some of the progress we've made on that, and still working on that. So we're still working on some of the smaller pieces and things like that, but we wanted to make sure that the first round, the first edition of the game cards are still they're still very good, high quality versions of the game in case, there's no internet or anything like that, that you still have a very good copy of the game, even if it is a first edition card.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's great that you're waiting until the other stuff is done. It'll be a really great version of the game on the cartridge.
Yeah, exactly. And very thankful that all the people who had pre-ordered the physicals are patiently waiting for that as well.
Yes. So now that the game is out, how have you felt to see the reaction to it and people playing it?
I was really excited. When the game first came out, I actually just watched nothing but YouTube people, YouTube, TikTok, just people reacting to the game. And I watched a few full playthroughs of the game just to see how people would react to different events. My favorites were getting people to go to the new bosses and seeing how they react to it. Particularly because I implemented a lot of things almost towards the end of development. I had added some extra little bits to it. So just making sure that it was properly balanced and does really cool things and that sort of thing. I mean, like, okay, does this make sense for different players? And it seems like it has. But my favorite was always going and watching the reaction to people who've never played the game before get to the very end to the one of the final battles, which I'm not going to spoil here, but just like their reaction to getting to that room with that battle and being like, their reaction to to that. And it's just been really, it was fun to see that, especially people who've never seen the game, never played the game, and never got to that point. These days, something like that might not be as shocking because you have games like Undertale. I recently have been playing Void Stranger, so something of that nature that has like a lot of hidden secrets that are to you. So like that's something that's still like interesting that people still have not seen or heard of, like the spoilers to off. So by the way, if you haven't yet, don't go looking deeply into it. You can go see like the first like zone 1 area. But don't go past that. You really want to like go into the game fresh. And unlike some unlike some games, off is only like a 4-hour RPG. It's not I mentioned Void Stranger. That's like an 80-hour rabbit hole. I'm much more kinder than you forgot something at the very beginning of the game, and so now you have to replay the entire game. I'm a little kinder than that. Not that the Void Stranger is bad. It's a great game, but it sometimes can be a little. I personally like to be a little more kinder towards people's time.
That's a good choice. I'd like to talk a little bit more about how you feel about different RPGs. So what aspects of a game do you think define it as an RPG?
The big thing I think as an RPG, the thing that really defines it is really like, to me, it's the overworld section, right? Because there's a lot of different RPGs that have different styles of combat. I'm thinking of like, for example, Knuckle Sandwich. That's an RPG, but at the same time, it's like instead of like a combat, it's like a WarioWare like mini game that you have to play instead, right? But that's still an RPG. Right? There's another one that I saw at PAX where instead of, it's kind of like an RPG combat, but it's a rhythm game, right?
Yeah.
And I think the thing that kind of like correlates all the different like RPGs is that there's multiple different sections of the game where you can stand around and look at and do either puzzles or more specifically talk to characters, right? It's like that sort of overworld section that's kind of an adventure. And just like, what's the difference between that and an adventure game? And I think the difference between the two of those is that an adventure game really wants you to figure out like sort of puzzles, right? You want to find a lock and a key. And then an RPG is really more about trying to explore through a quest while being able to have some sort of like combat, some sort of adversary that is like against you, right? In some way.
Yeah.
While still doing the sort of like overworld dungeon-y sort of thing, right? You're still going, you're going into an area with the explicit purpose of finding a key or the fourth MacGuffin or something of that, but you come out of the dungeon, right? It's opposed to like an action game is kind of linear. You're going over like different portions of which the other thing of which is that, genres have blurred over the course of however many years, right?
Yes, for sure.
Is Last of Us an RPG?
It's tough to tell, really.
I mean, is it? Because all the stuff that I was explaining about, there's sections where it's like, no, you're just talking to characters and walking around, and like, that's an RPG, right?
Yeah.
There's combat sections, but the combat section isn't really like the core. Like, combat is not the core focus of Last of Us. It's the interaction with the characters, right? And so, would you categorize that as RPG? Yes. What does Naughty Dog or PlayStation? They probably categorize that as an action game, right? I'm not sure. Actually, no, I don't know what they officially catalog that as, but the genres just keep getting more and more like blurred these days. So what is and isn't an RPG is one of those like I'll know it when I see it kind of things.
It's tough to really pin down exactly what it is. That's why I like to ask everybody who comes on and talks about what they think it is. So maybe we can come to some kind of collective finding on that, whatever it might be.
I think if you want to go like in like a truly taxonomable way, it would be like something that goes all the way back to tabletop RPG. Does it have that sort of like can you taxonomically find some way to go back to, say, Dungeons and Dragons or some similar style of game? I think that's where, like, if you wanted to be like hardline, but again, my answers is more, dude, everything's so blurred these days that like
Yeah, it really is.
it's really hard to define.
Absolutely. There are a lot of RPGs that ask you to input a name for the protagonist and create their design. Do you have any favorite names or types of protagonists you tend to make when you play an RPG or any kind of game that really lets you do that? Or is it just based on the game or whatever you're feeling like at that point in time?
I'm actually pretty boring because most of the time I would either put in my name or like the name of the run that I'm doing. So like for Dark Souls, I would just put like, level 1 run or something of that nature, right? I don't really put in anything that's like interesting in like my first playthrough, but then like a second playthrough, if I'm playing that, then I would put something more interesting and fun. But usually like the first time I'm playing through, it depends on what it is. I've been burned, like I on my side, it's like I've been burned on games like Dark Souls where it'd be like, oh, you have all this character creation and then you'll never see the character ever again. Or at least because of the hollowing mechanic and all that's in Dark Souls.
Yeah.
Which makes it extremely funny as a game, but also just like, you put in all this effort and you can only see it when you're in the special state of whatever it is in that game.
Yeah.
Which, hollowed or embered or, there's all the different ones.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. But no, usually I just put in like my name or something of that nature. I'll play around with like a character creator that's like a face or something like that. I'll play around with like putting different pieces and parts on it. But a lot of times, like right now, these days, I don't have a lot of time to play games. I've been busy working and making games. So I'm a big fan of like, the randomized option or just give you one of the predefined options because I want to get right into like the meat of the game.
Get going quick. Yeah. When it comes to actually playing the game, do you have a favorite archetype or job role that you like to play?
Does speedrunner count?
That counts. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd say so. Yeah. So just total optimization.
Yeah. So that's one that I like to do, which is like try to get through as quickly as possible, which makes it an extra challenge because usually in those modes, you're usually running at either low level or low item or something of that nature, right? Where you're trying to go through without as much helper items, right? So, in many games, they'll say like, oh, but if you go in this area, you'll find this cool item that will help you, or you'll do that. And, that's good. That's great. I love doing that. But I'm trying to like add that little extra challenge of like, but what if I don't get that? Right?
Yeah.
So that's my style of play, which is like adding that weird extra challenge of doing that sort of like stuff. Right. So that's the type of player that I am. As a game designer, I'm looking at all the different other ways that people are playing. So we have we have a bunch of different predefined save states. So one of which is speedrunner, which is me, but we also have a story runner. So that's one of the QA testers. So we have a couple of different people that were just playing through as normal. We also have like 100% explorers, so something of that nature. So whenever we play the game, and get us, we have a bunch of predefined saves that are like, okay, well, here's 100% explorer trying to go for this boss, as opposed to a speedrunner that's trying to get to this boss. Is this possible? Should it even be possible? Right? That sort of thing.
Yeah, right. How much do you value the relationship between game mechanics and story in RPGs or otherwise?
I think that is very important. I think that it is something that is very important to make sure that something makes there's an old phrase like 10, 15, 20 years old, like ludonarrative sense, right? Where something that is in the game, it makes sense to you, to the players, to the world. I think that it is something that is important to do so. And I think it's important to show, not tell, all that other stuff. But it is important to make something that makes this sort of sense, because if that happens, you can do um, you can tell stories that can't really be possible in other mediums, right? So, for
Yes.
example, we mentioned Dark Souls, the Halloween mechanic. That is something that at least narratively can happen to all the characters in the game, right? So even though that is something that is a
Right.
game mechanic that happens upon you, it is also something that happens within the game, right? You would have
It's a rule of the
right? It's a
world.
rule of the world, right? So you would have Solaire going hollow in the end of his quest, right? That sort of thing. I think that's something that's really important because, and I don't think it really like, you know, dawns on people because you go by and it goes, oh, he's hollowed now, right? Solaire's hollow now.
Yeah.
And you don't realize that until you realize, oh, that's just the game mechanic that I've been playing with for a while. And it's just part of the world. It's just natural to you because you've been playing the game for however many hours that you just don't sit there and think about where did that thought come from, right? Who told you, you know, he was this. No, he just visually looked like your character when your character was hollow, and you're like, oh well, okay, so it's becoming like that. I think it's really important for games to be able to do that and have something that makes sense, right? And so you're following
Yeah.
through and making sure that like, oh, okay, so this makes sense in this world that these rules happen and that all the rules generally make sense. Why, if something, if there's an exception, why is there an exception? One other thing that's important is following rules to their ultimate conclusion as well. And it's like, well, what happens if the player takes it further? What happens if an NPC who can, go out of the bounds of the player area does something and it goes even further, right? Than what you
Yeah.
want to be able to have the player be able to do for, mechanical reasons or just pure time budget or something, but you want to, take it that much more further. I think that's really important to be able to do so.
Absolutely. Totally agree. So now that we're near the end, what advice would you give to anyone out there who's thinking of making their own game?
Playtest, playtest, playtest. I've been on this for a while. I want you, you need to go out and make sure that like a lot of people are playing your game and that a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds are playing your game, right? So you would have someone
Right.
that's good at video games, but then you have someone that's good at video games, but they're only good at like FPS or whatever. So they understand like basic game mechanics, but maybe a lot not like the deep intricacies of like an RPG combat. And you have someone who's never played video games before. But I think it's important to be able to do so because if you don't have people getting that sort of like negative emotions, whether it is boredom or frustration, you want to be able to avoid that. And the best way to do so is going out and having other people play your game and being able to go, okay, is this actually like what I am aiming for in my game, or are you getting something else? Right now, you can also get cool ideas like players doing something really weird, and you're like, oh, well, we're just going to either allow that or fix or change it. Bug fixes are one thing, but it's really more like, are you getting what you actually wanted out of that moment? Are you actually getting like whatever emotion it is that you're trying to convey, whether that is joy, whether that is sadness. I've been playing through Silksong, and I think frustration is something that's just like, I guess that's something we're gonna have to get used to. But that shouldn't be something that like unless it is something that you are intentionally going for. You really want to make sure that like, oh well, you got something that wasn't supposed to happen. And again, something that wasn't supposed to happen
Right.
isn't just like a technical bug, but rather like, oh, it didn't like this moment didn't click on you, or you didn't do this,
Yeah. It
didn't have
didn't
this
impact as
impact,
much
right? So it's
or
not
yeah.
just, yeah, so it's not just bugs. It's not just did you get the lock and key? Did you get the actual like emotive moment like that you should have received?
Yeah, playtesting is very important. Like what you said a lot about they're getting a bunch of different backgrounds because yeah, that's super important to making your game accessible to a lot of people too.
Yeah, so it's really important to do so, especially at Fangamer. We have a lot of employees. We have a lot of people there that are there for, for various admin tasks, finance
Yeah,
or what have you. And so we have a lot of people at Fangamer who've never played video games or don't do it very often, right? And so it's a lot easier for us to go, hey, like, can you come play this for like 2 or 3 hours, right? Because you've never done this sort of thing before. Like, what's your reaction to this? As opposed to like, I've played every RPG on the planet. I know everything. I know exactly what to do. And I would have players that would go in and do like the paralyze and the lethargic and all this other stuff. And then I have someone who's never played a game before and go, well, I don't know. I'm just going to keep pushing attack and avoid the competence menu in general. And so some of it is like trying to teach players like, hey, you need to actually start interacting with this. With off, one of my design goals was to get people to use the item menu. It seems like, especially in my play style, I always tried to avoid it. And so that's why, a lot of people was like, oh, I had to get to my items now for off. I seen that as one of the complaints, or like people talking about off, which was like, oh, well, I finally had to dig into my item menu to be able to like get through this battle. Good. That's what I wanted you to do.
Yeah, right. Do you have any idea what kind of game your team will work on next? Or do you think it will have anything in common with Off?
We're working on a bunch of different prototypes of something, but it really is like super early to tell. What I will say is right now, when I mentioned the blend of genres, that's something we're really like looking into. And it might be a blend that I don't think I've never... And like it would be something that a lot of people is not expecting, I would say. Right. It's certainly like, but right now it's so early. Like the next thing that you would see from us would probably be in about 2 or 3 years.
That makes sense.
Unless we happen to get a different project. We just finished Off. We're doing some bug fixes as well. So while we're working on primarily right now we're just working on what is necessary to get Off out. And then as we start working on more things, I'm interested in, on our side, on Fangamer's side, right now we are self-published, self-funded even. And so, what can we do in the situation where we don't have to impress an investor? We don't have to impress a publisher. We can work in genres. We can work in categories that I'd say, oh, it's a mix of this and this. And, every publisher on the planet would look at you like you're nuts, right? On the other hand, I want to do something that's like weird and unique, but at the same time, like, with the playtesting thing that everybody's like really into, right? It's something that I think would be, that I think is an interesting thing. So I want to go and like do some like weird sort of experiments, and who knows what's going to come out in the next 2 or 3 years.
Well, I'll be there to play it. I can't wait to see what comes next. And good luck working on that. And thank you for being here and talking with me about all this. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for all your work on Off, you and the team. It was an awesome game, and I'm glad that I could play that as my first Off experience, and I'll go back and play the original now.
Yeah, so again, that's what we made the game, the new version of Off for, is that we made it for players who have... the original intention was for new players who have never played the game or wanted a chance to play the game. And if you liked the original, it was a chance for you to be able to go and support Mortis, because that's the other portion of all of this.
Absolutely.
Off was originally a freeware game, and so now with this new paid release is that you are out supporting Mortis, who never originally received anything for his freeware title. So you can go check out. It's Off on Steam and on Switch. You can also go to offtherpg.com to learn more.
Thanks again to Ryan Alyea for joining me to talk about Off. The game is available now on Steam and Nintendo Switch. Thanks for listening. I'm Cody, and this has been RPG Potential.